So I've kind of entitled this around supporting behaviour with autistic and SEND pupils, but it is quite a universal approach. And what I've done is try to draw on the current research and kind of approaches to behaviour. I'm really putting that under the SEND umbrella because obviously there's a huge amount of information out there, and hopefully you will find something that you can take away to your school to apply to your students, and just help you think a bit more deeply about what's going on. That's my aim for today. I've not at all given you a whole list of things to do that will make your children behave better, because it really doesn't work like that. And so it's a little bit more digging down what might be happening. And there's obviously, we know, a lot of unmet SEND needs, a lot of children who don't have diagnosis or are waiting for years for diagnoses. And in the meantime, what we want to do is be able to support them well. So my first question really in the chat box is asking you, what are your kind of main what's the word? Questions, I suppose, or challenges around behaviour with, well, we are going to focus in on SEND pupils, but what are your main challenges or things that you find a little bit overwhelming at the moment? What would you put for that? Okay, that's a good one. Is it communicating? Sheer volume of needs? And I think, Nikki, that's, true right through the age groups, isn't it? Right into secondary as well. Okay. Particular things around noise. Okay. Well, that's a good start. Okay. We will come back to those things, hopefully. Yeah. Oh, we've got some more building relationships with new students who are autistic. Yeah. Level of need, emotional dysregulation, demand avoidance, contrasting needs. Yeah. We will try and pick up on all those things as we go along. So just to let you know who I am, actually it's about 12 years, Julie, that we've been doing little bits together. But I was a primary school teacher, then I worked in specialist school for 8 years. We're through the age groups up to 16. And in 2014, I established my own company called Reach Out ASC. And now we are a team of 8 specialist teachers. And what we predominantly do is we go into schools and we walk the walk with teachers, with young people, trying to support and find the right support around them. So with schools, like some of the children that you might know, we would come alongside you and walk that walk and find out what is going on, try and put things in place, provide resources, and be there on the end of the phone when you need us and things like that. We specialise in autism, ADHD, and the PDA profile. But obviously, there's a lot of crossover with us SEND needs. So between myself and the team, we have an awful lot of experience from ex-Senkos right through to very specialised SLD teachers. So, you can ring up and just ask us about things, as well as if your school is wanting that specialist teacher input. We do training, as you can see, but we will again train anybody who wants us to, because again, the needs of the children are the same in different places. And our autistic children, ADHD children do grow up as well. We are a disability confident employer, and our team are neurodiverse. And I have written 5 books now for teachers. I'm about to write my sixth. In fact, I'm on with it now. My sixth book is going to be a set of social stories for secondary age children. I've done the primary one. I needed to complete the set. So I've written books for teachers around supporting autistic young people in the class, and it is the what do you do in the classroom? And that's our approach all together. Just this month, we have launched, we've become a symbol friendly organisation with widgets. So you will see widget symbols through this training. And part of that is our commitment to make our training accessible for as many people as we can. And we do know that there are teachers and people that we train that could be dyslexic, have auditory processing difficulties, ADHD, autistic. And so it's just there to make sure that, we can support as many people as we can with the communication. Okay, let's get on with this then. Today, I'm hoping that we kind of have a think about what's going on in today's classrooms and look at the frameworks around that, seeing what research is being done, what information is out there. We're going to explore evidence-based relational approaches. And it's definitely based on the practice that we have. A lot of the time when we work with schools, the first thing is, this behaviour that is really puzzling, perplexing, and sometimes challenging us as staff. And therefore, we're looking at what is going on there. And we're going to look at some proactive and practical strategies for autistic, ADHD and SEND pupils and how you may apply those ideas to your own setting. I'm aware that there are primary and secondary and maybe even special school people who are going to be listening to this, and therefore I've given as much breadth as I can within this presentation. So the main guidance that I'm going to be referring to are the Education Endowment Foundation work around supporting SEND students and around supporting behaviour. The most recent, there's a specific one at 2019, but we'll be connecting to. And there's a framework or a toolbox from Nottinghamshire local authority that was created in 2021, which was really looking at a relational approach to behaviour, which is really, really good. I'll be sending links to both of those for you. And then we're going to look at some of the principles in the books by Paul Dix. I don't know if you've read him or not. He wrote the book When the Adults Change, Everything Changes. And Dr. Ross Greene, who has written a book about called The Explosive Child. And that particularly might be interesting to some of you as well, considering if you've got children with that autism and PDA profile. So what it kind of looks like is I've brought these approaches together, looking at a behaviour framework from Nottingham, the whole school approaches that the Education Endowment Foundation are giving guidance on. And again, they're a very well respected organisation, building into what schools can do. And then we have our proactive evidence methods from Paul Dix and are helping pupils develop emotional regulation, which is a huge part of what behaviour we see in a lot of children. These are the main links which you will be able to access in your own time. As you say, you'll get this to be able to look at those. Right, so that's a summary of really where we're heading with this. The Education Endowment Foundation have actually kind of pulled together our main. Oh, I can hear. Sorry, I'm just thinking somebody is. Can you just mute yourself if that's okay? I can hear a bit of background. Thank you. So the Education Endowment Foundation, looking at what we now call adaptive teaching, it's gone through a lot of different names. It was differentiation, adaptation, but basically looking at 5 things you can do in your classroom for all children that make everything more accessible for everybody. So they're kind of, that we've called them for quality first teaching. We've called it now OAP, ordinary available provision, universal provision, but whatever it is, it's kind of using these 5 principles and they've put that information together. So around explicit instruction, so that's a communication tool. Cognitive and metacognitive strategies are our cognition and learning. Scaffolding, particularly for organisation and executive function skills. Flexible grouping for social interaction and social collaboration, and using technology to make things accessible. And that particularly can be helpful for children who have developmental language delay, dyslexia, things like that. So there's a lot of things out there, and actually, if you read them all, it would be really helpful because there's a lot of great stuff. But what I've tried to do today is bring that together in information around when we've got children whose behaviour we find challenging. Now, I do have to say something about the compliance versus relational approaches. If you are here expecting somebody to be a Tom Bennett fan, well, you're wrong. And if you don't know who he is, he's a government behaviour guru. Because I find a lot, I disagree with a lot of what he says, not everything, but because I see the negative impact it has on SEND children, and that compliance, no excuses and strict consequences approach has a real view of behaviour as a choice that must be corrected. And that really relates down into primary schools at times. You've got a green choice or a red choice, and it's all very much a blaming the child that they do know how to behave, they can do it, and therefore they are choosing not to. And that is very problematic when we're talking about children with autism, ADHD, SEND for many reasons. A relational approach, a needs-based approach, however, looks at behaviour as communication. It's communicating an unmet need, and that could be that the child is dysregulated. It could be they haven't got the capacity at that time, or they haven't got the capacity generally to be able to do what's required or is being asked of them. Within the no excuses and strict consequences approach, the adult role is about enforcing rules and deliver sanctions. And again, that is very much enforced on teachers to do that. Again, it for some children who maybe not have SEND needs, some of that can help. And we're really not talking about having no boundaries at all. But what I'm thinking of here is that is all. The relationship between the adult is I say you comply, and that's it. However, with a relational approach, it's about building those relationships, helping the child feel safe. The goal for no excuses is compliance and control, and the goal for relation is connection, understanding, and self-regulation. I would put that with that co-regulation, because a lot of our children need adults to regulate alongside them. They haven't got to the point in their life where they're able to self-regulate, and sometimes that's where we actually fall down because we're expecting them to be able to sort themselves out in a way or to regulate their own emotion, but they can't. And in the no excuses, I mean, for some children, it can have a correcting effect where they behave because, they don't want to get in trouble. They don't want the consequences. But for many of our autistic, ADHD, other SEND children, it creates fear, shame, and often exclusion. The majority of children who are excluded from school have a SEND need, and that should tell us something about that approach. And otherwise, if we have a relational and needs-based approach, it builds trust, belonging, and long-term behaviour change, and that has a bigger impact. So I'm not on the side of no excuses and strict consequences. I've seen it enough in enough schools, and many secondary school teachers will tell me that's what their school is telling them to do. But actually, there is wriggle room in the middle of it. So don't be downhearted. I would rather it not be. I'd rather have a much more open approach as a whole school. But you in your class as a secondary teacher have some wriggle room around building that relational and needs-based approach as well. So you can hopefully learn from that today. So we're going to go through three sets of kind of research and advice. And we're going to start with just the daily class management when there are SEND needs. It was already mentioned there's a lot of needs, a lot of conflicting needs, a lot going on. And we're going to look at that as universal provision. And what I mean by that is, what we learn, we can use for everybody. And that will support our SEND children as well. It can just be tweaked for them, or it can be personalised for them. But if we've got our head around our universal provision to supporting behaviour, then we're going to be able to feel more confident when we're dealing with things that are more complex. The things that most, I hear most from teachers when they're struggling with a child is that I just don't know. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. I don't know where to go with this. I'm stuck. Because, generally mainstream teachers are not trained to cope with this amount of need. And for many, if they've done a PGC, for example, tell me that they get 1 hour of SEND training and the rest is all about delivering a curriculum. Now, most of us know that if we want to deliver a curriculum and help children succeed in that, it needs more than just standing there with a script and telling them what to do, doesn't it? Because children are relational and that's important. They're also growing, they're learning, they're testing boundaries, they're trying things out. All that is part of teaching as well. Then we're going to look at things that are, again, most common, where we really do get stuck at times: refusals, violence, meltdowns, or other unsafe situations. And then finally, we're going to look when and where do we go for help. So I've tried to structure it for you so that you can see, bring it together, because it's the end of the day, isn't it? And people get tired, so try to break it down into chunks for us. So if we look at daily class management where there are SEND needs and this universal provision, it's all the strategies that you have that you use for everybody. And part of it is actually not assuming that your students do know how to do things. And I think often when I have conversations with teachers and they're saying, oh, the child, won't come and sit on the carpet, for example, or in secondary school, they haven't ever got all their equipment together and that caused disruption and all those things. It's a good thing to be is a bit curious about, well, why is that? Especially if it's happening a lot. Everybody has off days, but actually, if that's happening all the time, is there more going on? So the Nottingham Toolkit encourages to look at behaviour as unmet human needs or communicating a message to us. Child who was always disorganised, forgetting things, never has their shirt tucked in, or struggles with lots of other things. As actually, if that's happening all the time, there's something they can't do. There's something a need that isn't being met, and that's the way to look at it. The Education Endowment Improvement in Behaviour things has different recommendations, but the first, number one, is to know and understand your pupils and their influences. That's a funny way of saying it sometimes. It's not just their peer pressure or what's going on at home or, copying parents. It's about, okay, what past experience have they had? What is their attitude towards this that they're doing? And has it been damaged in some way? What are the barriers? So it's encouraging us to be curious about what's going on. So we mentioned, the behaviourist versus a relationship-based approaches. If we kind of think, okay, we're not just managing behaviour, we're actually taking a bit of control here, because feeling out of control is really hard for us teachers, to actually think, okay, I'm the detective. I'm going to try and understand and find the right way to respond to this. Not just what somebody's told me to do and hoping it works out all right, but really getting it myself. And we've also got to think about, neurodiversity is about everybody having different types of brains. Our neurodivergent learners will work differently and process and experience and understand things differently from our neurotypical children. So it might be our communication, or the way we give examples, or the way we give instructions. If they've taken things literally, for example, that can have a big impact on how they respond to what we want them to do. Learning barriers are really important to understand, and they can be really simple things, such as the lighting in the room, the environment. They can be a child having undiagnosed dyslexia. They can be the seat that they're sitting on, the sensory needs. Oh, excuse me. And so again, knowing a bit of what can be learning barriers is going to help. Could be they have poor working memory. Could be they have poor executive functions, auditory processing disorder. Now, we don't need to know everything about all those things. We just need to be aware that those things can affect their learning. And there's a lot more understanding around trauma, around anxiety now, and particularly those children who are particularly demand avoidant have a very deep anxiety need. It's really hard, isn't it? I've spent all these years trying to understand these things myself. And I hope you never feel completely alone in this, but there is a lot of help out there. So let's have a look at what it says. So if we are doing adaptive teaching, this is the kind of, again, Education Endowment Foundation. If we are going to meet the needs of a class full of children, where many of them have different needs, we've got a curriculum that has a standard. Yeah, at year 2 or year 8, this is what they should be achieving. And unfortunately, as in teaching now, we've got, well, if the child doesn't get to that standard, then it's our fault, us teachers, we're the ones in trouble. And I think that really has to be changed because, again, our skill is as a teacher is to start to think the why, what's going on here. First of all, it's asking, are they the right expectations for this child? So if you've got a child in year 6 who's working at year 2, there's no way they're going to get the expectations and reach the expectations of year 6. But can they reach the high expectations within where they are? So that's our job, to make those adjustments and to make sure that they can achieve. So our teaching is responsive to where they go. And yet sometimes they can link into something at year 6 and think, oh, wow, they've got that as well. So those high expectations aren't putting a cap on the child, but they're just realistic about where they are. And we do that through scaffolding, being flexible, and then sometimes targeted support. That doesn't always need an intervention taking out of class. Sometimes it could be the way you give them the worksheet. I have a child I work with, his targeted support is that the teacher draws a coloured box around different parts of the work so he can focus in on, I do the red box first, then I do the yellow box. It's targeted for him, and other children have started asking for it now because they know that it helps them as well. And that ongoing assessment of his independence is not about doing all these tests that just, it can drive us mad and feel like, oh, we've got to get the children through these tests. I work with children who were never, ever going to pass a phonics test. And if they're still doing phonics, like at stage 2 in year 4 or year 5, why on earth are we doing that? Why aren't we assessing what they do know? Why aren't we assessing that, how we can teach them to read a different way? And again, those are the challenges we have when we have a whole class. But the word independence is really important because, again, our SEND learners are the most likely to be learn helplessness, really. They're most likely to go to secondary school and be sat there waiting for an adult to start for them or tell them what to do. They're more likely to not try something because they've just experienced so much failure that why would you? They've not had the support and the assessment and success to develop that independence. So that's adaptive teaching in a nutshell. And apparently that's what we all should be doing. But you know what? Most teachers are, but we just refine it all the time. But there are times when we need help. So this is where we start with behaviour, the iceberg. I'm sure you have come across a behaviour iceberg before. But one of the things is to help us reflect as teachers what really is going on. Because we're busy, we've got, if you're in a secondary, you've just got to recover from one session because you've got the next lesson coming, a whole new set of difficulties. Or in primary, you've got day after day after day demands and challenges for yourself to keep going. And conversations with parents can go differently. But basically, when we work with a staff team, we give them time to reflect and say, okay, what is the behaviour that we're seeing? Somebody's mentioned a child making a noise, quite a loud noise. Okay, let's just write that down and say, observable, what do we see of that behaviour? And as we write it down, usually on a big A3 pad of paper, we can start to build a picture of the things that are happening. What I like to do, and I haven't done on this one, but often when I'm working with it, is put another layer underneath that and actually write in there as well all the things we know the child does well and what actually works that we're trying already. And this often gives the teachers a real boost as well, thinking actually, what does a good day like look like? When did we have one? What happened? So we're starting to build at the beginning of our assessment here just by using this simple diagram. And then this is what we look at. What's really going on? What stress is the child under? Is it a communication stress, cognitive stress? Is it a processing? They can't process as quickly, or they're not catching it all in their working memory. We'll have clues. Teachers know their children, even if you've only got them for an hour a week, you've picked up clues, and this is the space to put them. Are there social emotional difficulties? Are there things? Yes, there might be stuff going on outside our lessons or our class that we don't know. So again, we can put a question mark. But do we feel like there might have been trauma? Are they just overwhelmed and burnt out? Have they got unmet needs? Are they in distress, pain? Have they had illness? We have children who have brain tumours in schools, and that affects their behaviour, or a death in the family. Are they masking? Have they got sensory overload or sensory processing overload? Have we just got too much uncertainty and too many messy transitions? And that's really common in secondary. Now, this list could be a lot higher. We usually tailor it to, what we know a little bit. If we think the child might be autistic, we might put some autism specific things in there, but we would look at other things as well. And if we know that a parent have said, I think my child is dyslexic, for example, well, where is our evidence? This is a problem with masking, though, because some children are having that Coke bottle effect where, they're being shook up all day and the lid comes off at home. And it's so important that we involve parents and the child themselves, where possible, in this conversation. I don't know if you ever thought to sit down with a child, draw this kind of thing and say, okay, this is what behavior we see. What do you think you're doing? But tell me why underneath, what's going on inside for you. Not all children can do that, but it's a useful trial, especially I do this with teenagers a lot, and it does produce some really interesting conversations. So if we turn that iceberg upside down just for a moment, to think about what's happening for the child, that there's a lot of demands mainly that they can easily get overload with. It might be that they are just falling out with their friends, or finding it difficult to find a friendship group. And that is then really, impacting on their behaviour in the classroom. But there are all sorts of other little things as well. So if we can use this to gather that evidence and be the detective for the child, it gives us a starting point. Okay. Now, I wondered at this point is anybody would like to share really of kind of it's funny you've put refusals, Suzanne. We're going to have a look at that in a moment. But I'm just thinking that is there anything that you have tried that's given you an insight into a child's behavior? That's a good point. Yes, Shauna. Yeah, journaling, making a kind of record of what's going on in the day. I hope you include in that what goes well as well, because we can often really focus in on all the stuff that goes wrong. That's what CPOMS does, isn't it, in many schools? So can we actually, also put alongside that the things that the child can do, the things the child is engaged in, the things the child and we together have really enjoyed as an interaction. Anything else? Yeah, sensory assessment can be massively illuminating when we understand the challenges for the child in just navigating the school day, the school environment, the interactions with others, the dinner hall, clothing, lighting, yeah, textures and touch. That can be really helpful. Yeah, getting the child to draw pictures. And there's for older children, there's a thing called comic strip conversations that can help you again work through what might be happening. I think part of the problem in secondary school, isn't it, that secondary school teachers don't get time with a child to discuss these sorts of things. So if you're having particular difficulty with a child in your class in secondary, it might be worth seeing if you can get, a break time or something with that child just to have a conversation. Um, this is a lot of what our team do in primary and secondary, but secondary particularly. Okay. So it is about, okay, we're being detectives, we're trying to find what the child's perspective is, and they can't always tell us, and they don't always tell us the truth. They often sometimes say what they think they want us to hear, so it takes time to dig in. Um, but it can be very valuable. But as you say, other things like assessments can help as well. So I thought it might be useful to just focus in on an example and see what we could do with it. And again, feel free to add comments or questions in the chat box. One of the most common behaviours that is challenging in a classroom is a child refusing to work or to do anything or to join in. And a lot of that is based around, that we as teachers have a set of tasks that we want to get through and that we want the child to achieve every single day. That happens in within one lesson and it happens within a whole day. But it really, our education system is very product driven. It's very much on you produce this piece of work and then I can check that you've done that and therefore we have success. And that is all building up to the testing that we do, the exams that we do. So, when a child's refusing, it can often actually trigger a lot in us. It's like, yeah, but I've got this stuff I need to do. And it's then we start to kind of delve into the yes, but you must do this. I was doing some training with some teaching assistants over in Yorkshire a couple of weeks ago, and each of them agreed and said that it was common that their class teachers put pressure on them to get a child through a piece of work. If they were doing one-to-one particularly, that this child needed to produce the product the same as everybody else in the class. Now, I'm not blaming teachers for this because there's a lot of pressure on teachers to do that. And it takes a lot of bravery sometimes to just stop and say, hang on a minute, is the child actually learning anything at this point? Or are they just sitting back, letting the TA do it for them? And there's something we can all say, tick, yes, they did that. But actually, the problems just keep compounding because they've not learned anything helpful, except if I can't do it and I refuse, somebody will do it for me. And, again, it's a small amount of children, but it has a significant impact as they get older and older. And in their adult life, it doesn't help at all. Now, if we're looking at the Nottinghamshire approach around behaviour being communication, that allows us to have an insight into, okay, what is the child communicating? And if they're saying no, There could be lots of different reasons, lots of different things. Sometimes no is shorthand for I don't tell you I don't understand what you've just said because you'll tell me off. I've had this quite a few times where children, in the sessions I've been having with them, we've worked really hard on saying, I ask your teacher, use these words when you don't understand all the words they've said and say, please, can you explain it to me again? And I worked really hard with this child for a while. And then he came back and said, the teacher just told me off for not listening. And it's hard, isn't it, when you're busy and you kind of like all these children, that some of our children just can't understand what we're telling them and need that breaking down, but they don't want to seem different from their friends, or they haven't got the words to say, I don't understand. So they just say no, because that's the quickest and easiest way out of something. For some children, us saying no to them is a bit of a trigger, isn't it? Now, if you put that alongside the education endowment about knowing your pupils and what's going on for them, that focuses us in on, okay, can we provide something that's structured, consistent, and prevents that refusal? So if we know a barrier for them is that they're not going to understand our instructions, then we can give them our instructions in a different way. We might write them down. We might show them a picture. That's proactive and it can reduce the child's refusal to work. Paul Dix talks about when the adults are calm and approach it very logically and don't get upset about it. And, is saying, okay, is the child safe? Are we able to approach this kindly? How can I get them ready for what they're going to do if they're not doing it? And then Greene talks about kids doing well if they can. And he talks about the focus being collaboration, shared problem solving. And that would enable us to look at the situation. Well, the child's saying no. Is there something we could do together to start it off? Or can we explain what the problem is so we can work through it? And again, all those are simplistic, but that's what we're going to break down a little bit now. So what we're doing is we're drawing on those key documents that really have looked into behaviour and all the research around it, and particularly around SEND children. So if we start with the relation-based reasons, I've got some ideas here as well. What's going on when a child refuses? So Paul Dix says when the adults change, everything changes. Why might they be refusing to do that piece of work or follow your instruction? They may not be, this approach says they're not emotionally safe or they're not connected to the adult. Their fear is being told off, shamed, or compared to others. They've had a lot of experience of past failure or negative feedback. So there's a lot of children actually that I know who just associate doing work with criticism and failure. And that has been their experience. They don't trust you, perhaps. Will you help them without judgment? And maybe the tone of voice that you've used has just felt a bit triggering to them or a bit too controlling, too insistent, and they haven't had time to process it. Now, those are just possible reasons, if we're looking at it through the relationship lens, why that child may be refusing. Now, you can put refusing, you can put any other behaviour in that. Do we ask those questions? What can help? Well, Paul Dix's 3 rules are be safe, be kind, be ready. Can we give the child some support on feeling safe, approach them kindly and getting ready to actually be able to achieve that task? Then positive values you have in your class, not rules to enforce. So you can have those rules. If you haven't read his book, I'd really recommend it, because it does talk about, us as adults have got emotional regulation and we can make a difference in our own approach, even if we've got an overarching, more negative behaviour policy around us. Okay, so that comes from Paul Dix, and it's very linked to the Nottinghamshire approach about behaviour is relationship based, and how we support it is through building that relationship with a child. It doesn't mean we don't have boundaries, but where we have boundaries and the child isn't meeting them, we work through our relationship with the child in order to get them to understand and be able to work within those boundaries. So, number two is the cognitive and executive function reasons, and this comes from the Education Endowment Foundation. This is about the child is unable to cognitively process the thing they're being asked to do or the situation they are in, because it could be a social situation, and therefore they show their behavior is a pushback if I don't understand and I don't know what I'm doing, so therefore, I'm going to do this instead. And it isn't, again, it's not a choice-based sort of system. It's like I don't know what else to do. And it could be, if it's a cognitive reasons, it could be round, okay, they don't have the skills yet. They are behind the expectations of the year group, and they know that they can't do those things. And so, it can be really a lot of shame. They might not have the writing stamina, the working memory, the ability to plan. This is where executive functions, if you've not heard of them, are really important. And they really are need scaffolding and supporting in our SEND children. Might be just that we waffled too much and our instructions were too complex, and they don't understand what to do. It may be that they can't hold the steps in their mind while they're also trying to work out what to actually do. They might not just be able to start. All these are executive function skills, and they just might be really, really tired from sensory overload, previous lessons, having to keep it all together, trying not to let that fizzy bottle lid, go whoosh, and so on. So again, if we support their executive functions, their cognition, enable them to understand, then we can reduce some of the behaviors. We know children get into habits. I can't, and that can take quite a lot to get through. But success breeds success. And a child who's in year six who knows that they've got really easy work compared to everybody else is can be very easily kind of spiral into switching off, having poor behavior, because they're not achieving any success. They don't see themselves as a successful learner. So we have to work with that. And then thirdly, again, bringing in the different models. So we've talked about Nottinghamshire, behaviour support document, executive function from Education Endowment Foundation. Dr. Ross Greene talks about emotional regulation. Now, for those of you working with more complex children and those who have ADHD, this is going to be a big reason behind behaviour. ADHD is not naughty children. ADHD is a complex interaction between emotional regulation, poor executive function skills, and imbalances in chemicals in the brain. A lot of behaviour is misread with ADHD children. There is a piece of research that says by the time they are 12, children with ADHD have heard 20,000 more negative comments about themselves. And so they have this innate belief that I am bad, I'm broken, I can't live up to people's expectations. And that leads in two ways. For some children, they become people pleasers, overachievers, trying to make sure that they please everybody all the time. And that's where we get a lot of the girls who are masking. Boys can mask too. On the other side of that is those who give up. Well, I'm rubbish, I'm no good, that's all that anybody's told me, therefore, why will I bother? I will just kick back at you. I will be oppositional. I'll just create loads and loads of distraction because I am not getting any good relationship from you. I'm not getting help with my emotional regulation. I'm getting no positive success in my education. Now, you as a class teacher, if you're in primary, might be having to cope with that, that's, from years beforehand. I don't know if you've ever received a child and said, oh, good luck with this one. I once had a child brought to me like that. Good luck with this one is a nightmare, right in front of the child as well. Honestly, the amount of time that I spent on building a good, positive, success relationship with that child was worth every single minute. It was really hard work, but I was determined to change his view of that. So that's our first three sort of approaches to behavior. We can do all the practical stuff of supporting children, of helping them, like first you do this and then you do that. But if we understand the reasons why behavior is showing up and why they're struggling to be able to do the task that we're doing, another cognitive reason, by the way, is boredom. And again, that predominantly affects our ADHD children because boredom literally shuts their brain down. It's not that they're choosing to be bored. If they're not, if their brain doesn't see anything interesting or the point of what they're doing, it can start to shut down. And that neuroscience has really helped us understand that. But how many times do we say, well, life is boring, get on with it anyway? Instead of coming alongside them and say, okay, I know this is boring. There's a reason we're doing it, and it's this. So, how about we chunk it into small parts so that you can see your progress and your success as you're going through it? That's one of the main ADHD things that you can do, and yet people often miss it because they say, well, they're just being naughty. And again, if you're on this sort of course, you probably don't think that, but it is worth saying. Does anybody any kind of questions around those things? So what I'm trying to do in this course, I know there's a couple of people joined us a bit late, is look at some underpinning research and approaches about behaviour that can help us be more curious and more investigative when we have got children who've got difficult behaviour. We're often looking, aren't we, for the quick fix of, well, if you just do that, it will make that change. But actually, I've worked with SEND children for many, many years, over 20 years, and it rarely, rarely gets to the bottom of it and changes anything. What we really need to do is understand what's going on. So, drawing on the key documents of the Nottinghamshire Behaviour Framework from the Education and Endowment Foundation Framework and Paul Dix and Dr. Ross Greene, that's where we are looking into this to try and hopefully send you away. Maybe you'll get some answers, but also a way of looking at what's going on with the child so that you can dig deeper and have a more lasting long-term change in their behaviour. So there are some more approaches that link to those research and those documents. There could be social reasons why the child's behaviour. Now, this becomes more apparent as they get older and into the teenage years, but actually it can start very young. It can start with that in reception child, the child just doesn't understand the social rules around what's going on in your reception class, that they don't understand that that people come into the carpet means everybody comes to the carpet. They may not understand what a finished piece of work is supposed to look like or what good work look like. We always say try your best, do good work, but actually do they understand what that means? And that for our autistic, ADHD and our SEND children can carry on right through secondary as well. Now, as they get older, and we often see this really exasperated in year five, year six, being anxious about peer comparison or being watched by others, being singled out, having to do something different. That can be a huge impact on behaviour. It may mean that then they do copy inappropriate behaviour. But honestly, as well, and this, I know a lot about ADHD. I've done a lot of research around ADHD and kind of the prison pipeline as well, and the vulnerability of ADHD children to exploitation, gang culture, addiction, things like that. Um, a lot of it is wanting to belong, but having many, many years of being rejected. That happens to autistic children as well, and they have vulnerabilities around relationships. So, autistic children can struggle to communicate socially, but also our more typical children can find it difficult to understand and communicate with our autistic, ADHD, and SEND children as well. Especially if they've got a language delay or difficulty, then it isolates them, it makes them feel isolated, and therefore, again, behavior can be communicating that how do I belong? I'm struggling to make friends. People are bullying me or calling me names. I can't tell you that, but that's going on. So, as well as not understanding the social world, it's also about other people not understanding them. Dr. Damien Milton calls that the double empathy problem. There is also language processing delay, and when there's chitter chatter and you say, do you talk partners or talk to your partner about this? By the time they've understood what to do or have gathered together enough information to contribute, everybody else has moved on. And that also can cause a lot of frustration. And also, again, their interpretation based on their experience about feedback can often be very literal, but also negative. So a lot of our SEND children can feel like if you say try again, they read that as I've failed again. So again, we're looking and digging down into that behaviour, that refusal. So I'm still trying to link this to refusing to work. What could be going on for that child? And again, success breeds success. Relationship building between children. Instead of putting them in a group, put them together in a pair, somebody that can support them or they can get on well with, and therefore can produce and structure it. Give them a good structure to work through in order to produce a task. Again, use our positive feedback. And in that, I mean, we need to be specific. Oh, you're good today doesn't mean anything. But if you say, oh, I like the way you persevered, or you're listening really well today, oh, look, you started that task yourself, well done. All those little bits of feedback can counteract the negativity and build up confidence. Again, that's one of our key ADHD strategies that is absolutely ingrained into, I put that into all my ADHD reports. So there's a lot going on. Sometimes responsibility can help as well. Having responsibility either in their classroom or around the school, that can help as well. And is that stopping them refusing to work? Well, if we put all that support together and success and they feel believed in, it can produce more ability to give things a go. Okay. So another one, again, linking to Nottinghamshire and EF, is environmental. So I've got a nice picture in the corner here of a very, very busy, messy classroom. And, the thing about this, we've learned a lot about environmental impact on autistic and ADHD children in the past 10 years. Luke Bearden talks about autism plus environment equals outcome. And I would put that ADHD and environment equals outcome as well. So for different reasons, this very messy, busy classroom can have a real impact on our autistic and ADHD children. For autistic children, it could be too bright, too busy, too messy, too overwhelming. They don't know where to look. There's too much information coming to their brain and very easily be overwhelmed. And the refusal to do something is just that nothing's going in my brain because the environment is overwhelming it. In a secondary school, it might not look like that, but in a secondary school, it could be the noise around the classroom or the classrooms, making noise or chairs scraping or outside noise. I've sat in secondary classrooms with ADHD students and autistic students, and actually, it's been really hard to concentrate and have a conversation with them because the classroom next door has a door open, there's lots going on, there's chatter, and it can be really difficult, can't it? The other thing about the environment as well for ADHD children is that their brain is searching and scanning all the time. It's not no attention, it's almost too much attention. There's no filter to filter things out. So these busy, visually busy environments, the child is unable to sit and do. And they know that they're not going to be able to because their focus isn't there in their brain. So it's much easier to say no and not do it. And that becomes a cycle, isn't it? They don't know how to get out of because they can't tell you that your classroom is doing my head in. They wouldn't say that, although they might. It's more about, okay, you noticing their brains all over the place. If they're not really looking like they're focusing at all, and we keep saying, will you pay attention? If we're saying that a lot, then it's a clue that the environment might be overwhelming. And, just telling somebody to pay attention will not make it happen. So what can we do? We can very easily adjust the classroom, take things down off the wall, reduce noise where possible. Yes, we can give children headphones, or older children can wear loop earplugs. Just taking visual clutter down, but also think about lights and noise and how they move around the classroom, where they're sitting. Some children like kind of privacy screens whether they can just put up on the table to cut out some of the visual noise around them. And also being able to move is absolutely vital because movement stimulates the focus in an ADHD brain, and that might be easier in some key stages than others. But if they're having to sit for hours and hours and hours, then you will find their brain start shutting down. But in order to get their brain working again or to be alert, they'll create distractions. They'll flick somebody in the ear, throw something, shout something across the classroom. And I was saying, there is some responsibility they need to take in that. But if we understand the reasons why and maybe just bring a little bit of movement into their lesson, even giving pencils out or going taking a note to somebody else or standing up at the back, all those things can have a big impact on behaviour. Okay. And finally, in this little section is around being proactive. So everything we've said so far, are reasons why children might misbehave and refuse to do something. It's really important that we think, have we thought ahead to create a distraction or a very clear instruction? Have we done what that child needs in order to be able to allow them to access what we're doing? And if you've got lots of children in a class with lots of different needs, bring it all together. What are any common denominators? So, for example, there are all these children who really don't get my instructions. They don't, I'm having to keep going and telling them what to do again. Right, that gives us a clue. Can we think of a way to make those instructions really clear for everyone? It may be that you design your worksheet differently, or you print off in little steps, first this, then that, and last this, and put that on the tables for everybody. It may be that you give them vocabulary sheets for everybody, because that's, so for you as a teacher, is a universal approach. It's preventing, some of the problems that can cause the frustration and the anger in the children. And again, it's really rooted in good guidance and research as well. So we're trying to preempt. When I do training, I've been doing training around attention autism this afternoon. And, one woman said to me, yeah, but if I let another child go first, that child's going to start screaming, "It's my turn, it's my turn, I need to go first." Okay, so my answer to that was, well, how can we preempt that? How can we prepare that child to know that somebody else is going to have a turn from them? Because often we don't do that. It just happens and then we're having to deal with it. But we could say beforehand, we could have a turn taking board. Or we could say, we're going to let this person go first because of this, and then it's you. So we can give them a little bit of time to get used to waiting. But they're not going to learn the skills they need, such as waiting and turn taking, unless we put that scaffold around it. So we can deal with the shouting, the always insisting on being first forever. But if we don't take that and be more proactive about it, think about why it's happening, that child's really terrified of unpredictability. So let's dress it up in predictability. Then they can move on from that behaviour. The great thing is we often move on from one behaviour and another one comes along. But hey, that's the world that we're in, isn't it? And also don't be afraid of repairing things. Sometimes things will break down and you'll have a tough time. So the important thing is that repair becomes part of your vocabulary with children. And I do this in the fact, and I've done this a lot for many, many years in my teaching. I think after the third year of teaching, I decided I was never going to shout again. I was getting that many sore throats and it just really wasn't getting anywhere with any children unless there was an emergency. So I had to then go and do a lot of research on, okay, what do you do instead of shouting? And that's really stood me in good stead for my SEND journey as well. So it is thinking through yourself, okay, what am I anticipating? And is there something I could do to perhaps teach the child something or, distract them, prepare them in a different way? All those things can stop this refusal to do something. And all that we've been talking about has been about one behaviour, hasn't it? Refusing to do. But you could put any other in that situation. So the repairing is there's some days I might just get it wrong and we've not got anywhere. And the child's distressed. I'm feeling completely and utterly frustrated too. So it's about thinking, do you know, today didn't go so well, did it? Tell you what, tomorrow's a new day. That's one of been my mantra as a teacher. Tomorrow is a new day. I'm not going to hold this against you today. We'll start again tomorrow, see where we get. And I think that is really good for you as a teacher because it's very easy for you to go home and feel like you've failed. We take things very personally and we're often so caring and so desperate to get it right. Be kind to yourself as well. But then you can bring that to the child and say, do you know, that was hard, but me and you are going to figure this out together. Let's see if we can find a different way. I didn't like the way I had to talk to you today. Let's find a different way of doing it tomorrow. It's going to be a journey this together. And I know so many children who really, really appreciate that. So, there's certain things that like Ross Greene saying kids do well if they can. I wonder if you agree with that. And if you so, does that have an impact on what you do? Paul Dix's rules: be safe, be kind, and be ready. How are we going to help children understand those rules? How are we going to help them be ready for something, have all their equipment together when they're really struggling and they're really have poor memory and they're always losing things. So it's about thinking proactive and reactive. Are you okay with that so far? I'm not sure if this is what you're expecting, but the reason I'm going into this depth is, behavior is getting more and more complex in school. We're getting more and more challenges, and having, just wanting children to do what I say is not working. So this is my bread and butter. This is when I go into schools, what we're doing alongside teachers. I'm just bringing with you, I say, the research and the guidance around it so that you understand that. So it gives you something to reflect on as you carry on. And I hope you're not having to do this on your own. I hope there's a whole school. If this was a whole school approach, it would be amazing, wouldn't it? And I do know schools who have this as well. So I just wanted to add a little bit at the end about pathological demand avoidance or demand avoidance, because it's one of the things I'm asked most about. Now, when I started out as an autism specialist, I didn't know much about ADHD, but children kept being diagnosed with autism and ADHD. And so I became as expert as I could in ADHD so that I understood that. And interestingly, I will have a little confession that it led to me getting my own ADHD diagnosis, which has been a big relief and very interesting journey. However, we are also asked a lot about PDA. And I first came across somebody with that profile probably, let me see, 15 years ago when I was working in a specialist school. And although we were wholly autism support focused, there was one child in one of my classes who just did not respond to any of the autism support that we were giving him. He was refusing all the time, very demand avoidant. In fact, if we said his name, he'd give us a great big kick. And so, we realized that obviously something was different about this child. And so that started my journey on understanding PDA. I now am on the ICB board of the local NHS, who are trying to put together a statement about what they believe PDA is. I'm involved in the PDA Society, and it's probably one of our most common requested training at the moment. And I work with children with that profile in classrooms, in schools around Lancashire as well. But it's a tricky one because demand avoidance isn't always PDA. It stands for pathological demand avoidance, not public displays of affection, which my children thought it was. But it is about a child who cannot cope with demands because it triggers panic attacks and anxiety. So it's a dysregulation of the nervous system. We don't fully know what creates it. However, there is now a lot of understanding around what is our support for that child to look like. Now, for me, it works best when the whole school has had training, and that's primary and secondary, because it's really important that everybody works together and know why you're doing something really different with one child. And one of the things that a child with extreme demand avoidance or PDA might need is a lot more autonomy. And that's very, very tricky in our school system. Because if you don't have a different approach, you are going to get very, very distressed behavior. You're going to get controlling behavior. You're going to get a child who has meltdowns, maybe not at school, but at home, that are very extreme. And it's really important we work with parents on this as well. So I can't say much more because I need 2 hours to really go through it all, but do get in touch if you're interested in some more information. I will say we have 4 videos on our YouTube channel at Reach Out ASC, and one of them, free videos, anybody can get hold of them, is Understanding PDA. So if you want to know more, you can look at that free video. But possible reasons that we get this no, this refusal, or this behaviour that's again not engaging, is that we have demanded something and that's triggered that need for control or autonomy, that panic attack, that anxiety rises, they feel cornered, they feel powerless, their whole system is on red alert. And imposing an instruction rather than working together on something. The whole approach around demand avoidance is around more collaborative approach, changing your language as an invitational language rather than demand language. So it is a whole new skill set, isn't it, if you've got a child with this condition or this profile. And again, there's a lot more to it, but generally we would offer choice and agency rather than just saying you have to do this. We'd say, would you like to start with the heading or drawing first? Choices, then they feel like they have some control. We reduce power struggles, working with them, not on them. and celebrate curiosity and creativity over compliance. That is the most succinct, summary of how we support a child with that extreme demand avoidance. The other thing is that demand avoidance can come with burnout for autistic or ADHD children who have had years and years and years of waiting for an assessment, not having their needs being able to be met, school stress, schools being stressed because they want to help and not able to help the child. And often that has a huge impact on the child's mental health and they kind of go into burnout. Now, interestingly, we recognize burnout in adults, but we don't recognize it in children very well. There is a whole lot of emerging literature on this and research, but you might have a child in your class who is in that state of mental burnout and they are just unable to access anything. And so you might see it as violent meltdowns. You might see it as a child trying to escape, a child getting very shouty and refusing and disruptive. So again, understanding what's going on behind them is really important. This is not about making excuses. I often say to my ADHD kids, I've done quite a lot of work with ADHD teenagers, and they're great. It's like herding cats. They can be all over the place, but we go with it. And I tell them at the beginning, like, I'm not going to shout or impose rules. What I'm going to say is, if we are going to work together, what do we need boundaries wise to be able to do that? Now I've got the luxury, haven't I, of a small group to do that with. And so they come up with things. And at times I've had like 6 children all talking to me at once because they've all got something to say. And I've just had to stop and say, just pause. I can't understand what anybody has been saying. So where are the boundaries we've all crossed? And it's pushing it back on them to learn and to notice and understand how a dynamic can work in a group. You can do part of that within a classroom, depending on what you're doing, what you're trying to get done. And if you build it into what you do with everybody, then that we get this, we're not making an excuse. It's like, okay, we have to think about this and we have to take some responsibility for our part in this. Because we often get the blame game, don't we? Well, he said this and he said that, and they did this and they did that. And then it's really hard to untangle. But if we have to model the practice of, okay, what's going wrong here? How did it happen? How can we all work together to make it right? Tricky one, that, but it's a massive life skill that's really important. Okay, let's have a bit of a pause. All right, there's a lot I've gone through there, really. And just summarize it up. I want you to kind of think, how curious are you? And how curious are you allowed to be in your school? Because obviously every school is different. But curious and reflective teacher is about, what am I assuming? And have I actually asked the child what's going on? Now, you might get some real tall tales, some good stories around this. However, taking time to observe, ask the child, I wonder what's going on with this because I've noticed that. You call out a lot when we're having a discussion in the classroom. One of my children once said, "It's because I've got some great ideas and I don't want to forget it. I forget to put my hand up. And I thought, okay, right, well, we can work with this. Let's see what we can do. Have you got any ideas?" And in the end, we gave him a whiteboard and he put down something on there until he was ready, so we didn't forget it. Um, um, if it's a child, thinking about, somebody said earlier about a child making noises. For an autistic child making noises, it's often a sensory need, like a humming or a talking to themselves. It's a way of either processing what it is there is going on in their brain. And it might be something you did yesterday or last week, or something completely, different from what you're thinking about now. It could be a way of drowning out the background noise that's really hurting their brain. So again, a lot of children who are noise sensitive, who are autistic, will use noise that they are in control of. So they will talk to themselves or they will hum or sing because that's drowning out the noise that they can't control. So we've got two ways to go there. I don't know if any of those are helpful to you. But again, maybe either ask the child, they may not even notice that they're doing it. Ask the parent, just take a few things. What have you noticed around that that might help you then move forward? Because I bet telling them just to stop doesn't work. Thinking about how much stress is in their bucket. I don't know if you've heard of the stress bucket, but basically, a lot of our children who are autistic, ADHD, who have other SEND needs, already have more challenges every day than other children. They may have stress from many different areas. It might be like in secondary school, not being able to have the executive function skills to organize homework, so they never do it. And so they're having detentions constantly. If that's happening, we should be looking at what is happening, rather than just giving them more and more detentions. Just a simple question. Why did they do that? Wow, what are they trying to communicate? Now, this is an important help for you. Are my tolerance and arousal levels at the right stage to support the child through this? Now, remember, if a child is having, maybe they're doing something quite violent or threatening, it could be verbally threatening, it could be just plain annoying. One of them, know your own triggers. One of my triggers is being spat at, and as soon as anybody's would threaten to spit at me, my levels of anxiety are up here, off the roof, really. And I know that the way I react is I want to run away. I've got fight or flight. I don't want to be stood around trying to deal with somebody because inside I'm absolutely heaving. And so it's like knowing my own response levels and my tolerance level at the time means I need to sort out how I respond. And for some, it's like, okay, this situation isn't getting anywhere. It's making me wind up as well as you. We're going to have a break somehow. We'll come back to it later. There must be a way through it, but not right now. And it's difficult. That's just one suggestion. So you should be asking yourself, do I need to back off right now? Have I backed myself into a corner or have I got myself into an impossible situation with a child? Am I giving it, it's like I've got into verbal combat can happen where we're arguing with a child. And if we got to that point, it might be just think, can I get out of this? Can I give them a way out? Or have we got stuck? Because at that point, the most sensible thing to do is back off and even be honest and say, we're not going to get anywhere here, are we? Let's back off. We'll find a different way. Again, if the child can't understand that, you do it with them carefully, redirect them into something else, and then go away. Maybe get some help to work through it in a different way. A lot of our SEND children are slow verbal processors or auditory processors. So we need to give them time to process what we've said. One of the biggest pieces of advice I give when a child's having a meltdown is remember it's like a computer crash. Their brain has stopped being able to process anything. And so, do you know when your computer crashes and you tap all your buttons and you move your mouse and nothing happens? That's what's happening in their brain. So if we talk at them, they can't process that language. So we need to find a different way to communicate if this child's in that state. So for some children, it could be write a note or show them a visual picture of something. So again, be prepared and be reflective about that. Have you got a way out plan? Not just for you, but for the child as well. Have we got something that can just reduce all the tension in this? This is why I'm not a big fan of isolation booths, of detentions. If you forgot your homework, you've been explained that detention is the thing, you go and do that homework you've forgotten. That is a really natural consequence, isn't it? It makes sense. I haven't done the homework, so I go to this place extra in my own time where I have to do the homework. There's a connection. But many times detention's for things like not having your tie on or having your skirt too short or something. Um, it doesn't solve the problem. It just makes them more sneaky about, having it done or whatever. It's really difficult of what battles are we choosing with this child? And we've got to think about that. And really important reflective question for you as a teacher. What have I done before that worked? Either with another child or with this child. And again, depending on their age, their ability to listen, to hear you or understand what you say, you can have a work through that. Let's just, refocus. What works? When we've had a good day, what has that been like? What's been the conditions that help that? How can we build on that? That is the question that I ask teachers who often are on their knees, with the difficulties, the overwhelm. They just can't be reflective because it's just too much. And it's, that phrase, isn't it? You can't see the wood for the trees, or the other way around. I don't know. But if I sit down and say, okay, tell me about a time something's worked. Tell me about what a good day is. Right, let's write down, let's figure out what skills did you use that you have to help that? What were the conditions? What were the environments? Now, is there any of that we can work up from next? How can we keep that going? And that is a really, effective way of supporting behaviour and reducing the challenging behaviour, based in the practice that me and my team do on a regular basis. So, just bringing it together, here's a little visual for you. I'm trying to help you not just process what I'm saying. I'm trying to remember to pause. But if we're understanding as behaviour as communication, think about our relationship with the children. Are we being proactive more than reactive? Are we co-regulating? Now, babies are dependent regulators. They're dependent on somebody else to regulate them, like, change their clothes, change their nappy, give them food, give them comfort. The next stage in development, human development, is co-regulation, where somebody, usually older than you, comes alongside you and helps you learn to regulate together. It could be a hug. Now, how many of you as adults still need co-regulation? Do you always sort out your own frustrations? When you've had a bad day, do you go home and ring a friend or get a hug off somebody, in the staff room? It's really important, isn't it, to think co-regulation, we don't grow out of it, and to give the child all the responsibility to regulate, sorry, is too much for them. It's too much for me to say to you, sort yourself out, get yourself self-regulated, then get on with the job. Imagine if we said that. And that's what we tell children a lot. So keep the co-regulation at the heart of what you're doing. How can you help them regulate? And it could be through humour, especially your older children. Distraction. It could be a shared interest. Find out what they're interested in. If they love Burnley Football Club, find out a bit about it. Ask them how the game went at the weekend. They'll look at you like you've got two heads when you start, especially teenagers. But keep going. Say, no, I'm doing this because I want to be interested in you. I want to build that relationship and regulate together. It can be really powerful. And then, when you've found things that work and apply them continuously and consistently, keep teaching them. One of the things you can do, no matter what subject you teach, whether you're primary or secondary, you can always bring emotion into what you're doing. You can talk about what is frustration and how is it applying to us in this lesson. Is anybody frustrated because their science experiment hasn't gone the way it is? What does that frustration feel like? What do we do with it? Now, if they can get to a point of emotional regulation, and maturity and literacy, where they say, oh, I recognize I'm feeling frustrated. Oh, I could do this. maybe try a different way of doing it, what are you teaching them there? You're teaching them to persevere, to problem solve, to actually, work through that emotional dysregulation. And that's a big, big thing for ADHD and autistic children as well, because they're rarely taught that. But if you do it universally with your whole class, never matter if the 16-year-olds, are ready for their GCSEs or 3-year-olds in a nursery, at different levels, all those children being taught what is an emotion, how does it apply to us, what does it feel like inside our bodies, what is it making us do, and keep that conversation going. Share your own experiences of it as well. Just generally little, snippets, drip feed. It builds up huge amount of regulation skills in their lives. I'm often asked about the thing about, well, won't they need to learn this for when they're adults? I would say emotional regulation is one of the most important life skills as adults you can give. How many of you know adults who don't know how to regulate their emotions? How many of you know what you'd say, badly behaved adults who get angry and do stuff because nobody's taught them how to regulate their emotion? So it is a really important skill when we're thinking about behavior to go on that co-regulation journey together and communicate that together. It doesn't mean we're guessing what their behavior, what their emotion is, because somebody might be reacting differently. But you could say things like, do you know, if I was finding that a task really, really hard, I'd be tempted to give up because I'd be feeling so frustrated. But you know what? I've learned that frustration can sometimes give my brain extra energy to think of new ways of doing it. Or sometimes I have to be a bit brave and ask for some help. So you can model that with your children as well. Okay. So I'm going to bring some quick wins for you if I can, if you're in primary. Using those documents, those toolboxes of building safety, building connection and consistency. We obviously have these common challenges of high curriculum demands. That's there. We can't do anything about that at the moment. Don't know if it's going to get any better with the new review, but hey, I've been teaching since the beginning of the national curriculum, believe it or not. And I've just seen in all its, kind of, it's morphing into the next thing, just more and more tight schedules and limited flexibility. And it's heartbreaking, really, because I see teachers who love their subjects, who love teaching, who love children and feel so, so constrained by these demands. But also there's a common dynamics of the children in your class, how they get on with each other, how they don't, whether they know about turn taking, whether they've even heard of it, sometimes, and the friendships that and the bullying that can go on, or the name calling, the social media stuff. Even that in primary school can, be part of it. And the challenges we all often come and see is a disruption within the classroom, whether that's because a child is sensory overloaded, there's a busy space, there's unexpected noises, or whether somebody's come in and told you that, you've got to nip out and so somebody else is taking over. There's lots of different disruptions throughout the day, which can really trigger children. And those emotional regulations, we have big feelings in small bodies, don't we? We have a lot of tired children and overwhelmed children. So those are our challenges. What can universally we might do to help reduce the kind of incidents of behaviour that is going to cause those dysregulations? Very quickly, quick wins. Everyday practice that makes difference for primary children. Predictable routines. Yeah, so we talk about visual timetables and now and next month, but what they do is they reduce uncertainty. They allow you to prepare a change. Think about it, this next half term, when you're doing all your Christmas stuff, we have a whole video on helping autistic children through Christmas because they hate it. They hate the unpredictability. They hate the environmental changes. Lots of things are beyond our control. They don't like surprises. It absolutely unsettles them. They don't like all this waiting around in play practices or having to just spend hours singing Christmas carols or whatever. So, we need to make sure that we put more predictability in place for them. That will reduce behavior. We need to connect before we correct. And this, again, is showing you the source of these are name. Even just using the child's name more can really ground them in, that connection with you. Using that calm tone, praising their efforts, not their outcome. And that's a huge thing, that really helps all children, but it is a key ADHD strategy. Tiny choices can make a big difference. Again, Ross Greene promotes this in that if we offer, and we can do this with any child, couldn't we? Here's the tasks. Which one do you want to do first? Or, and again, if they really struggle to write the date, make sure they get that on the and move on to the next bit. Be choosing your battles carefully and give them some choice within it. That can really help as well with all children. Model that regulation. So say calm and co-regulate, narrate your thinking aloud. Okay, let's take a breath first. Really helps you as well. Breathing deeply is a huge regulator because when you've got adrenaline rushing through your body, that deep breath actually helps that adrenaline go through your bloodstream. It puts more oxygen into your bloodstream. But you cannot just do it when you're already dysregulated. So, regular breathing practice with your whole class, no matter what age they are. I can imagine, just think how useful it is for your GCSE 16-year-olds. Learn to breathe really deeply and understand the science of what's going on. Whatever age they are, they can understand that. And, use your simple rule language. If you're using and reinforcing, be safe, be kind, be ready, children can remember that. If I asked you now, what are your school rules? And you think there's a poster on my wall with 10 of them on. Now, what are they? Yeah, can you remember them all? But you can remember three: be safe, be kind, be ready. And those expectations, yeah, and remember, oh, that was great. That was a kind thing to do. That was a safe thing to do. That was a ready thing to do. You've got a wonderful vocabulary around your kids to help them be positive and see that they're being successful. So let's go on to secondary teachers because I know there are different challenges. And again, the main thing is in that limited relationship time, you may only have 1 or 2 lessons per week with that child. It's hard to build trust in that time. And obviously, I call it the previous teacher hangover. They've come from somebody or somewhere else, they've had a bad lesson, and you're having to now deal with the hangover of that. There can be a lot more complex social environments. There's peer pressure, teasing, embarrassment, social media. There's that cognitive overload, the fast pace of our curriculum, the changing subjects. I'm doing this and now I'm doing this and now I'm doing that. That multi-step instructions that they're being given. And just then, those that arrive late because they haven't been able to get themselves together on the way, or they've just been avoiding going to the lesson because they don't want to go there, or just low motivation. So here's some of the challenges we're going to try and address. Again, as a secondary teacher, think about what you can do, even if there are other things against you. Can you, within that, fix in your own flexibility? So small connections can make a big impact. And this comes from Paul Dix as well. Greeting them at the door, using their names, noticing their efforts. Your adult interaction can set the tone right away. The other thing I would impact on saying that as well, cue them into what lesson they're in. Don't assume they know they're in geography or whatever. Hi, everybody. Welcome to geography. I know you might be saying, well, I've been saying that all day. Yes, but it helps. Yeah, and it helps everybody. Clear visual instructions, so writing the steps on the board, and don't rely on verbal memory because you're freeing up then more memory, more processing to be able to get on with the task. What you're doing there is teaching them to check though. So some kids might need it on the table because they struggle with the looking up and looking down and figuring out where they are. If they've got it in a notepad at the side of them, The older children can write it themselves. But okay, do you do this yourself? If I've got a big task to do, I break it down, make myself a plan, teach them to do that because it's a great life skill. Tick off what you've done. That is executive functions. And again, put some predictability into your lesson routines. So, yes, you might have some flexibility, but open activity, short input, scaffolded task, reflection, that familiarity lowers anxiety, particularly in those lessons where you know that if you give them an inch, they'll go a mile. If you give them a bit of like creativity or flexibility, it'll go crazy. But if you keep your structure the same, your flexibility is within that. So your open activity, say I'm with 5 minutes, they could have quite a lot of creativity within that, but it's going to finish after 5 minutes. We're going to move on to the next bit because this is how I structure my lesson. And this again is good scaffolding, going back to 5 a day, going back to executive function support. You get your creativity within a good scaffold, and that really helps. And then that collaborative language, talk to them about what's tricky, what might help you. Again, you're helping them problem solve, think things through, knowing that all of life is not easy. That's important, isn't it? And we all have things that we find easy or tricky at different times. So keeping that conversation open. And again, using Paul Dix's rules. You can use these no matter what age, because in life, it's important to be safe, it's important to be kind, and it's important to be ready. So you just adjust the expectations and discussion around that to what you're doing and what age you've got. Be aware, though, that our autistic and ADHD children, particularly, are have developmental delay in executive functions, and that's their organization ability. They often have delay in their maturity and their emotional maturity as well. So when they're 14 and you think, oh, you should be able to do that, you're 14 now, they might be functioning an 8-year-old. That is really, really common problem that happens when the child is behaving like an 8-year-old, but they're 14. It's because developmentally that's where they're at. So we need to understand that as well. And predictability and empathy matter more than proximity. So it's like you don't have to be one-to-one with a child and on them all the time. Just little moments of connection actually build up a huge amount of respect from the child to the teacher. Now, I've sat with my group of ADHD kids and autistic children and said, okay, I'm going to allow you to be honest about your teachers. But I always like to start with which teachers do you like and why? And it's really interesting that they really respect teachers who know them, who have those little moments of connection with them. And they don't mind that teacher being strict with them because they know them and they believe in them. And that is a huge encouragement, I think, for us as teachers, especially if you are a secondary teacher and you are only seeing them once a week. It can make a big difference. Okay. So we are coming towards the end now, and I can't deal with everything, but I think if you really focus in on those proactive, universal strategies, they really can impact behavior. But there are times when we have, really vocal or violent refusals. We may have meltdowns, unsafe situations. The advice from, again, people looking at that relational, there's Ross Greene's book, The Explosive Child. You can think, oh, you've probably experienced that at some point. There's Paul Dix's book. And another one I would recommend, especially if you've got children who are low, it's hard, have complex needs, who don't respond to verbal or they don't have verbal language, and whose behaviour is very, very difficult to understand and maybe quite distressing. And, like I've come across children in mainstream school who are constantly banging their head on the floor, or they are, constantly hitting or biting other children. The There's no quick answer. We have to really understand what's going on for them. So, if we were going to look at that, again, it's just general information for you here. The thing is, if you've got something that's really big, explosive behavior, the best way to meet it is with low arousal. So if a child's up here, we are down here. We don't go over them. We don't put our body language over them because that is a threat. We don't back them in a corner. We do have to keep them safe, and we avoid carrying them places or lifting them or holding them as much as possible. Again, in my previous job working in a special school, we had children who had massive meltdowns at times and were very unsafe, and we had to be trained in team teach to hold them. But actually, the team teach training was very much on you do as much as you can to avoid getting in that place in the first place. And it works, but it does take that understanding. So simple things, you might think, oh, we've already mentioned some of these. That's good. It means these approaches are agreeing with each other. So preparing yourself. What are you going to say? How are you going to use your language? How are you going to use clear and non-threatening and quite literal language, or use visuals when you know there's a clash point with that child? Again, any age that can apply to. Just check, is that child or young person anxious first, and support that. You might need to do a bit of research about that, but often, particularly in PDA, it is anxiety. Check your own responses, being clear, calm, don't overpromise or threaten. So again, this is something that we work with parents as well. When they say, I'm going to ground you for 3 months because you didn't do your homework. It's really disproportionate and very unlikely to happen. Or you can't have your Xbox for a month, because you said a swear word in your class. Those things are disproportionate. They need to be calm and clear. We do want children to understand consequences. And sometimes, yes, there needs to be a negative consequence, or a repairing consequence, but we don't overpromise or threaten. We're prepared on what that is. A really simple example to that is if you knock over, the teacher's cup of tea on the table, everything's wet, and it's very easy to jump off your chair and go, ah, start shouting. Actually, that is unfortunate. It's made everything wet. The consequence is I need you to clean that up, please. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Whichever way you want to do that. So, we do a lot of teaching about what consequences are. We also teach them ways to save face than having to be, calling people names or telling them to F off or whatever. And we help the child understand that there are choices. If they've not done their homework, they've got a detention, there is a choice of seeking help to work out what support you might need with homework, for example. And finally, give them time to process, use specific feedback, or be silent. So that is based on the low arousal approach by Andy MacDonald. So they're all coming together, aren't they? These approaches are saying the same thing. Because it works, it really helps. And it's hard not to underestimate hard to not really understand the amount of sensory overload our autistic and ADHD children experience every day in school. A lot of their refusal, their behavior, their meltdowns are because their brain has just had enough, just cannot cope with it. There are examples here of children, not liking the sensory things in reception, and yet we have a whole sensory curriculum sometimes. The lighting in a lesson, so they can't see the board, they're extra sensitive to that. Just exhaustion, tiredness, overwhelm. Things that we don't notice because we have the filters to be able to filter those out and concentrate and focus on what we need to. But I don't know if you've ever been in a room where there's been a buzzy electrical thing that's really loud. Have you tried listening when that's happening? Now thinking about an autistic child who can hear the electricity all the time and think whether, that might be why they're short-tempered, why they can't concentrate, why they're telling you no or whatever, why they're hitting other people because, oh, they came near me and that buzzing in my head. But they can't always tell us that, can they? Okay. So if we're getting to know our children, I'm probably overwhelming you here. I'm just thinking, I did pack a lot into this, didn't I? Um, but when we're thinking about our children, can they tolerate? Are they within their regulation window in order to be able to cope with my lesson? And that's a question to ask at the beginning. It may be in a primary classroom. You've really, really thought, our triggers are often transitions, even the coming in and coming out of class, after assembly, after playtime. Okay, if children are coming in and they're not able to settle, maybe I need to go and look at how they're tolerating that transition. Can I make my transitions a little bit more calmer, a little bit more structured, a bit more purposeful, so that we actually, when we come into class, or when I come into class, can I give them something to do that moves, that regulates their body, ready to sit down? So again, that's why we have sensory diets. It's why we have the things that we talk about. In secondary, it might be your quick starter is something just to bring them into focus. I talk about geography, but maybe it's just bringing them into focus. This is geography, bringing the tolerance into, forgetting what else they're focusing in. Otherwise, we do get shut down hyperarousal, or we get hyperarousals. Okay. I'm going to skip a bit actually because we've already talked about there. And rules are again really helpful. So there's a big thing around behavior and fidget toys at the moment, and some schools have banned them, but there's a very good reason why some children do use fidget toys and they help. We tend to call it a concentration tool. And these are some rules that we put together. We've written them down so that we're anticipating that we might have to tell the child to put it down in the drawer sometime because they're not using it right. So let's anticipate that. Let's explain why they're able to use a fidget object or a tool, concentration tool. It can help me concentrate when I'm listening to my teachers. Okay, we've established why you've got it there. The next part is the rule. It must not distract other children. We need that boundary. It's important. So if it is helping me concentrate, it's doing a good job. If it isn't, put it in my drawer. So if you're walking around or the child's in your session and they are flicking somebody's ear with their fidget tool, you say, put it in your drawer, then they know exactly why you've said that. They've nothing to argue. It's not helping you concentrate, is it? Put it in your drawer. You've already preempted that. So you can do that with other things as well. Things that drive you mad in your classroom, maybe have a go at doing it this way. What are the boundaries around it and how are you going to communicate that? So, discipline is a hot topic. Consequences are sometimes needed. There's a whole campaign against isolation booths in secondary because in the end, particularly for children with SEND, they do not lead to success. There's plenty of evidence saying that. I have a friend who's a probation officer, and she's constantly asking me about undiagnosed SEND needs because as people in prison have had a terrible time being excluded from school because of their behaviour, and it turns out they have a lot of unmet SEND needs, undiagnosed, unassessed, and yet, it is a huge problem in our society. Discipline often keeps a child in a state of high anxiety, feeling unsafe, unable to regulate. You've isolated them, told them they have to go and sort themselves out, the thinking corner. It doesn't work, and for children who have these SEND needs. So we've got to think about how do we frame that. And we say we can have boundaries, we can have consequences, but how are we communicating that? Is it just you're in trouble because you haven't got your tie on or, wearing uniform? Where is it going to end? Often it ends in exclusion. And that's happening more and more and more and more. And it's obviously not working. So think about what your non-negotiables are and think about, are they really non-negotiable? Uniform is a big issue. One of my team did a whole dissertation for her autism master's degree around, uniform and how it impacts on children's learning because of their sensory needs. So, we know children who need to wear their hood up, who can't wear a tie, or we've sneakily put it on elastic, because we know they can't deal with it any other way. So, uniform is one of those issues, isn't it? And legally, we can change the rules for one child because that is a reasonable adjustment. We have investigated it, we've assessed them, we've figured out what's going on. We can change a behaviour by changing a rule for a child. Yes, in fact, I was watching Educating, we are going to finish in a moment, Educating Yorkshire, and she came in and said, you can't learn maths unless you wear real shoes. It's like, well, that's a lie, isn't it? And children know it is. Anyway, here we go. So the rest is just some things for you to read yourself. You'll get these as a handout, so you'll be able to read just a summary of that. And I thought some of you might want to take that away, think about it more, or share it with schools. So I've just put it down on there. So finally, where and when to get help. We have a system in our education system, and looking at universal, targeted and specialist waves of intervention. The universal is what we've been talking about at the beginning of this, what you do. It might be quality first teaching, people call it. It might be adaptation. It might be OAP, whatever you call it. What you do in your class and how you meet those needs the best way you can. The next level is additional interventions for certain children. And the third level is that specialist where you might get somebody in like us. We might come in earlier, to be honest, or you are then looking at the specialist, provision or highly personal interventions. It can look like lots of different things. Here's how one school put that together. This is Plumcoff Primary, just found online, but they're looking at this is a job done by all our daily staff. This is what we do. We use the plan, do, review cycle, and we get involved the SENCO, maybe an inclusion team, pastoral team. We get some extra help within school, but then also you might have teams that come into your school that can help you at that stage. And it's good if you can tell them what you've already tried. And then finally, we get to the stage of that EHCP. I mean, we have a really struggling system at the moment, which I can't go into, but that's what it's supposed to look like. So where are you getting help? You can ask help right at this beginning level through your school system, but you're also got some responsibility as a class teacher to do some of that assessment yourself. What is going on with this child? And if you look back on what we've talked about today, there's some tools there to help you ask the right questions and maybe bring together the evidence that will help the next stage. And it is all about the child. The SEND code of practice is about that. It's about the school. It's about the parents coming together. And I know that sometimes clashes, but you're supposed to be on the same side. There are other professionals that might get involved and the local authority. The help is, first of all, best from within school. But obviously there's outside agencies like ourselves that do as well. It's our job as a class teacher to start this graduated approach, to assess what's going on in their needs. If you don't know what the 4 areas of needs are, look. It's not just cognition, it's communication, it's sensory and physical, it's social, emotional, mental health. You might put a plan together, and that can be an official plan from your in-house school support, or you've just put a plan, I'm going to try this and I'm going to do it, and then I'm going to review it. The review is a really important part. And then if it escalates or something else happens, you need to be able to review that as well. Okay. And then we repeat that if we can. So just to finish off, and from Nottinghamshire, it says behaviour is not the problem, it's the clue. If we have that approach to behaviour, our role then is to understand what it communicates and respond with that empathy, consistency, and skill. And if we don't have those skills, that's knowledge, that's part of ICPD, isn't it? And it's what you're all doing today, which is great. I want to say, if you think you might be a neurodivergent teacher, do get in touch. This information will be sent to you, but we also have some help for you as well, because I've been there, and I work with other people who have been there as well. We can help. So there you go. Go to our website. There's loads of free articles and resources and information on there. There is one about a couple of articles about behaviour you can share with your school or whatever. But it is right on time. We finished at 7. I'm happy to stay around for a few minutes if anybody's got any questions. But thank you for listening, and I hope it's been really helpful for you.